Hello and welcome to the 5-Minute Film Club. Continuing a tradition that I set myself 4 years ago, where I would review a Friday the 13th film on Friday the 13th, today I've reached part 7, and the entrance of Kane Hodder to the series. The last film, Jason Lives, I'll put a link to my review of that film in the corner, so please go and see that review and watch that video. Anyway, Jason Lives took Jason in a more humorous and gothic direction and has become a fan favourite. It's definitely mine. However, series producer Frank Mancuso Jr. still wanted to get back the audience that he thought the series had lost ever since the final chapter was released. He needed a new angle and new blood. Away from the film franchise, they made Friday the 13th, the series, in 1987. Now, I've never actually seen this television series, but I'm sure I will be covering it at a later date. The series ran for 3 seasons and had absolutely nothing to do with Jason Voorhees or the film series, but has many connections with people that appeared in the series and also directors of the episode. I mean, David Cronenberg directed an episode of this series, so, that's going to be interesting, surely. But back in Filmland, for Friday the 13th Part 7, they wanted to move the series away from the traditional slasher formula that by 1988 had, quite frankly, died a death. Aliens were the thing that was dominating the box office in 1986, and big-budget horror films now were managing to attract big stars in the case of films like Fatal Attraction. What could a tiny film do to combat this fatigue? They first thought of mixing Jason with Freddy Krueger in a crossover film. However, New Line Pictures, the studio that owned and produced the Nightmare on Elm Street films, didn't want to play ball. Again, more on that later. Eventually, they struck upon the idea of a supernatural film that would see Jason have to do battle with a teenage girl with psychokinetic powers. This isn't Freddy vs. Jason yet, it's Carrie vs. Jason. The plot of the film starts after the events of Part 6, where we see a young Tina Shepard running out of her family lakeside holiday home at Camp Crystal Lake after an argument with her father. He comes running out and onto the pontoon to try and stop her, but she escapes onto a boat and onto the lake. Her rage gets the best of her, and her burgeoning psychic powers causes the pontoon to collapse, killing her father in the process. We then skip a few years into the future and see now a teenage Tina still struggling with the guilt of her father's death, returning with her mother and psychiatrist Dr. Cruz to Camp Crystal Lake to see whether she can finally move on. Dr. Cruz, however, is trying to use and provoke Tina in a way that will manifest bigger and greater psychokinetic powers in order to study her and seemingly present this in front of a medical board and get a load of money. But after one session, Tina inadvertently resurrects the submerged Jason instead of her father, and once again the killing starts. Oh, and I completely forgot to mention that there is another house on the lake, just like in Part 4, which is the party house full of teens. I can't quite remember why they are there, other than this film needs a body count. There is, however, one interesting character, which is the horrible Melissa, who teases Tina, a la Carrie, and we definitely cheer when she gets smacked in the face with an axe. After spending so long on writing and rewriting this film, they ran out of time to actually make it. After briefly considering offering the film to Fellini, the mind boggles at that decision, and also I'm quite sad that it never happened. The job eventually went to John Carl Buechler, who was a well-respected special effects artist, having apprenticed under Rick Baker and Stan Winston. He'd transitioned to directing and made The Troll in 1986 and The Cellar Dweller in 1987. Buechler was the person that would hopefully bring the film back in line to the effects that were created by Tom Savini for that original film. Buechler wasn't enamoured at all with the Friday films before he started, and was given just 6 months to shoot and edit the film, which didn't exactly lead to the most coherent and productive environments to make a film. However, he was resolute that it wouldn't be just your run-of-the-mill slasher. With the production moved to Alabama, the film has a completely different look to the other ones that came before it. I love the look of this film, in fact, and I know many don't, but I get that Buechler was wanting this film to be an over-the-top fantasy horror film, and and I think he gets part way there. I also love the fact that this film introduces Kane Hodder to the role. Initially, Frank Mancuso Jr. was reluctant to cast him, as he wasn't as tall as the other people who'd played the killer previously, but Buechler was adamant and produced a screen test for Hodder as Jason, and they signed off on it. Buechler's special effect makeup must have gone some way to making sure that Mancuso actually chose Kane Hodder for this role, because it is completely iconic and the best thing about this film. Add a stuntman as fearless and charismatic as Kane Hodder to it, and you have an all-round great performance of Jason. Before this iteration of Jason, he is just a stalker / killer, but Hodder injects thoughts and real weight to the character. I love it when Jason does the snap head turn. That's pure Kane Hodder. Buechler didn't want a Michael Myers copycat and wanted Jason to be finally a real movie monster, and I think he succeeds. However, the film is obviously not without its flaws, and I think all of them speak to the trouble that was going on during the production and the post-production of this film. Lead actors Lar Park Lincoln and Kevin Blair didn't get along at all, and their connection in the film is non-existent for me. Also, the rest of the teens, and in fact the whole story, just feels rushed and very unsatisfying. The amazing work that Buechler can do, and had done previously, is absent from this film. He put in so much effort to make the kills inventive and different and just something that we hadn't seen before, or at least not seen since the original or part 4. However, the film was just cut to bits by the MPAA, and he had to keep resubmitting this film. He resubmitted this film something like 9 times before eventually it was given an R rating. And because Paramount was a co-signator of the MPAA, they couldn't exactly fight any of these decisions. And when you watch this film, when I watch this film anyway, I just come away feeling like it's an incredibly sanitized experience and doesn't have the joy of part 6, which is a big shame, because I think in certain aspects, certain of the aesthetics of Jason, it's a notch up from a lot of the other films, definitely. Also, the music is sort of a joint effort by the person who was doing the television series at the time, Fred Mollin, and they also mixed in reused scores by Harry Manfredini, who wasn't available to score the whole film at the time, and as such has said he's never seen it. The mix doesn't work particularly well for me, but there is a theme for Tina's character that Mollin created that feels like it does connect to the action on the screen, at least. What they started when they were setting out to make Part 7 was a desire to make something new and maybe even get this film nominated for awards. However, no real risks were taken when you sit and watch the final cut of this film. The series didn't have the money or the might anymore to push back against the MPAA, and it was no longer a contender or trendsetter. The film was released in May 1988 and made just enough to warrant it being made in the first place, and also importantly enough to get a green light for Part 8. New Blood is definitely not the best film in the series for me. However, I think it's an important watch for John Carl Buechler, just to see how he would kind of follow up those first 2 films, and also importantly to see Kane Hodder don the mask for the first time. And next time, for the first time during this series, we get to see an actor return as Jason in Friday the 13th Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan. But until then, and until next year probably, thank you very much for watching, and goodbye.